Hello and welcome back to another Evan Hill Trains YouTube video / podcast, depending on where you are. My name is Evan, owner of Evan Hill Trains. I'm an exercise physiologist and online fitness coach. Today we will be talking about why heavy loads are less fatiguing than light loads, why you can't rush progress. We will be talking about the importance of eccentric strength for your quads and hamstrings, and I will be talking through the 90-10 rule for lifters and endurance athletes. Before we get started, I did just want to mention that my website has just launched. If you haven't taken a look, please do. The link to look at the website will be in the description, and my online coaching booking link will be right below it. Okay, if you are looking for online coaching support, make sure to book a call and we can have a chat about what package is best for you. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, I made a post talking about how a 1 rep max deadlift is less fatiguing than a few sets of bicep curls to failure. Now, this is actually true, and I wanted to talk about why and how this applies to the different populations that I normally work with. For athletes, one of the biggest mistakes I see is the pump day before a game. So I've seen people who will do a big arm day, try and get a huge pump the day before, and then likely will feel quite lethargic going into the day following their most important day of the week, competition day. The reason why this happens is when we do a lot of really high rep, low load exercise, we're building up a lot of peripheral fatigue, which leads to muscle damage. We don't want peripheral fatigue because it leads to muscle damage. Muscle damage is our soreness, our feeling slow and heavy, and it can take days to pass, especially when we're doing high volume, high rep, low load exercise. So peripheral fatigue, what is it? We have our calcium ion related fatigue and our metabolite related fatigue. Now, metabolite related fatigue is normally quite transient. It will come and go in the timeline of your training session, as long as you aren't doing anything too extreme. But calcium ion related fatigue is one that can be lasting and be the one that hangs around in the following days after training. When we do high rep, low weight exercise, we are constantly filling and removing calcium ions from our muscle cell. When we do this repeatedly, we are exposing the muscle to more calcium ions. And over time, we may actually struggle to remove the calcium ions from the muscle cell. This is where we get the biggest problem. So high amounts of calcium ion turnover or existence in the muscle cells. When we have these high amounts of calcium ions present in the muscle, we have what are known as calpains that come in and literally cause the muscle damage. They are pulling the muscle cells apart so that they can be rebuilt and recovered and repaired. During this time, we're going to have significantly impaired performance. So you can see how we have the light loads, high reps, which exposes the muscle cell to a lot of calcium ions. The calcium ion having a high concentration in the muscle leads to calpains entering the cell, which then damages the muscle, breaks it down, and then we have literally less functional muscle cells to use and access at a certain time. And this muscle damage being present also blunts our neural drive. So this calcium ion related fatigue is very, very harmful for athletic performance. And you can see how this arm pump day, the night or day before a game, can be very harmful to performance because we're damaging muscles, and this muscle damage being present can be very, very detrimental to performance because our brain blunts our neural drive and we have unpleasant sensations present. So one thing that is good to note is that this can be fiber type specific. So when we have this damage occurring in the muscle fiber, it's only occurring in that muscle fiber. So if we were to do an arm day, it wouldn't be as bad as if we did a very high volume leg day the day before. This is where it gets actually properly bad, and you're going to be putting yourself at a significant injury risk because you have the muscle damage present and likely some strain related injury already present before competition. When we do upper body sessions, we are still making a negative impact on performance, but it isn't necessarily the end of the world, but still something you want to avoid. Let's just circle right back to the start. Why are heavy loads better than light loads? The example I just gave you, where we are getting a lot of carrying over fatigue from a lot of different categories, where we have calcium ion related, our neural drive being blunted because of the negative sensations. That's why. But if we look at it a little bit deeper and we maybe look at training long term, heavier loads are easier to recover from. And when we're trying to get a high frequency of training from multiple different areas for athletic development, then that's when we really need to be smart, use our heavy loads and recover well so that we can run the next day, run in the afternoon, train in the afternoon, train the next day. We have so many things on our plate that something like a very high rep, high volume, low load exercise can actually catch up to us very quickly and start to manifest in lots of different areas too. For the average person who is starting on their fitness journey and wants to train smart and get their best results, heavy loads are going to elicit the greatest gains in strength and muscle. This is also true for our athletes, while also meaning you don't have this horrible soreness, this horrible muscle damage response the next day. You will feel more energetic the next day in comparison to if you had done very high volume exercise the day before. Simply because you've made all this muscle damage, there's an inflammatory response going on, which means your body isn't going to feel as good. If you're just starting out on your fitness journey, you want to make it as easy as you can for yourself so that you can succeed long term and make great gains. So that's more from an efficacy point. How can we make this work? But if we talk about outcomes, like I said, strength, muscle, but also joint health, longevity, and bone health, okay? These are all very positively impacted by heavy loads. It is very hard for us to get joint adaptations using light loads because our joints respond so very well to mechanical loading, which is mostly going to come from heavy weights. So generally, in our research, a really good number to aim for is 80 to 85% or greater of 1 rep max regularly. So using your big heavy exercises, your compounds, like your deadlifts, bench presses, squats, lunges, those big compound lifts, rows as well, so that we can then create a lot of mechanical load at a lot of different joints, put stress on our bones so that all of these areas can then adapt: our bones, our tendons, and our joints. With light loads, we get very little. Hypertrophy, as I hope we all know by now, is very, very forgiving. We can get similar hypertrophy from all the way from 5 to 30 reps. We cannot get similar tendon, joint, and bone related adaptations from 5 to 30 reps because we are changing the mechanical loading. So very important to use heavy loads as often as you can, irrespective of what your goals is. So athletes, obviously better for efficiency, fatigue management, all sorts of things like that. And then for our person who is trying to get fit, start on their fitness journey and wants to get great results, heavy weights for longevity and also efficacy. It makes it easier to do, not at the time, but to repeat long term because you aren't creating these huge levels of fatigue. It might be hard at first to get used to, but it is well worth your while. Why can't we rush progress? This is another area that I made a post on this week and I wanted to go into greater depth on. So we all know it takes time to reach a certain goal. Expectations may vary, but we know it takes time. And yet we want to push and really feel that sensation of working hard, smashing ourselves, and getting progress. Understandably so. But that's why it's so important to understand the reasoning behind your training, why you're doing it, and then employing that really effectively. That's what gets us progress over time. Whereas guessing, smashing yourself, redlining, buffering and suffering, all of these common belief systems and practices which are centered around working harder than last time and just smashing yourself, really lacking sustainability, is more mainstream than training smart. We want structure, around our training to drive results. It's right here on the shirt. Structure drives results. We want to have a plan with our training, stick to the plan, and reap the benefits of that plan. Because when you work with professionals that know what they're doing, they will make you a great plan. What does rushing lead to? Rushing and trying to push progress, flogging yourself over time, leads to burnout and injury. When you force progress, you will be overreaching, you will be worsening your form, you will be hitting numbers higher than what you need to get a certain adaptation. So if we want to get stronger, we need to train at around a 5 rep max load. After we do 1 to 2 sets of this, that's all we need to do, especially when training close to failure. If we continue to just hound ourselves, use different exercises in the same area, so say we're doing 5 sets of 5 on bench, and then we do 5 sets of 5 on incline, 5 sets of 5 on maybe a cable fly, which I don't love, but this is a pretty common way of doing things. That's 15 sets for a muscle group in one training session. This isn't recoverable even over a week. Even if you do that once a week, will over time not be catching up, not be keeping up. Your tendons will be degenerating. They will be becoming dysfunctional, and over time be a lot more vulnerable to sprain injuries, ruptures, which we don't want. Not to mention when we're working with more strain susceptible muscles like hamstrings, quads, maybe even groins, adductors. These muscles are susceptible to strain. They are much easier to lengthen and damage due to length. If we do this too much, we are piling up repeated strain injuries. This is the number one risk for muscle strain. So if we're adding this up in our training to an unnecessary degree and then going and doing our sports practice in a strained state, we are asking for muscle strain. Why not? Let's use him as an example. My guy Lachlan, I've talked to him about what he needs to do to help his hamstring get better. He's doing all the right things, but he hasn't been keeping me updated, and I'm not sure how, but he's doing 6 sets of hamstrings in one session. I would cap out at 4, and the one real kicker here is he's doing a hamstring curl and then a Nordic eccentric overload. These two are redundant, as in they train almost 100% the same fibers. There may be a tiny little bit of novelty to them, where some muscle fibers are being trained in one that aren't in the other. That's all good and dandy, but that overlap is a lot of muscle mass which is being strained unnecessarily and then rolling into sports training where we have to hit high velocity, sprint, change direction, be very dynamic and ballistic, and he's doing it all in a strained state. A lot of you may now be thinking, oh God, I'm doing my 6 sets per training session, potentially more, in these strained susceptible muscles. Your chest is actually one of these. And thinking, okay, let's just think about what we really need. For the hamstrings, I would suggest that you literally just do eccentric overload. We'll talk more about this later. But if you want to do a little bit more, you could do a hinge and then your eccentric overload in the form of a Nordic or seated hamstring curl 2 to 1. That is all you need twice a week, and potentially only 1 set of each if you're doing it twice a week, to really take care. You just got to take care. You do not need to annihilate. We're stimulating and thinking about the long-term gains we're going to make doing this, not what can we do right now to make a huge difference and do as much as I can right now. That's not healthy. It's not what we want to do. Now, I touched on it there just for a second. Why is it better to have a long-term approach than focusing on short-term gains? I think the best place to start here, and one that a lot of you watching can connect with, is we aren't professional athletes. The right now does not matter. It is only important to us emotionally. It likely does not have a huge effect on our career or our lifestyle outlook. We are doing this to take care of our long-term health, and we're doing this for our long-term enjoyment. It is likely a hobby or a casual pursuit to most of us. The amateur or local level athlete, of course, wants to perform well, but they still need to take a long-term approach so that they're avoiding injury and burnout. Professional athletes, or those who are very close to becoming professional athletes, are in a very critical point in time where the short term is very important, and squeezing out 5% this week and sacrificing 5% next week or next month is well worth their while. The average person and the semi-pro or recreational athlete should not have this approach. You should be thinking about, how can I get 50% better by next year? You should be thinking about, what can I do to get better every year or every month? Looking at things on a week or day-to-day basis can really get you in trouble, and thinking about the short term is a fast track to burnout, injury, and not reaching your goals. When we have a short-term approach, we can hyperfixate on subjective measures and get emotionally caught up in things. When I was trying to get my sub 20 minute 5K, I was flogging myself because I knew I had a time limit before preseason and my next football season started. This was much to my disservice. I want to hit a sub 20 minute 5K, but I have no time restriction on that. I'm 22, I'm not going to be a professional athlete, and flogging myself 4 times a week is not the best way to get fitter. I was pushing for progress. I really wanted to get that couple seconds faster every single week instead of letting the process happen. The same goes for heavy lifting. You want to add 2.5 kilos each side every week to that squat, to that bench, where you just need to sit at that weight a little bit longer and let the gains happen, so that over time you can keep stepping up instead of doing it all at once and then hitting a wall. We know that you need an adaptation reserve when you're training for endurance pursuits. We need to build that reserve with lots of easy training. And we need to build our coordination and our motor unit recruitment by training in an unfatigued state when we're weightlifting. If we're smashing ourselves, getting close to failure every single session, we can't do that. Back to the endurance training. If we're smashing ourselves every single session, we can't absorb. We don't have a reserve for adaptation because we're taking away from it every single session. We want to build it up, drain the sponge so it has space to absorb with our easy running. We can only do that when we remove our emotions from the training and be smart. Build our duration at easy. Really spend a lot of time at easy so we can build our adaptation reserve and those hard runs become fruitful. And smashing ourselves, we get so much out of it and we hit that next little progression every time when it's time to go. Think about at the gym, if you took that extra week at the same weight and then progressed not every week, but every fortnight or every month, then you would smoke it when you went and progressed. It's about being smart, being patient, and removing your emotions from it. Everyone wants to progress. Some people have a better plan than others. That's where you can really separate yourself and start to make really good gains long term. It makes the most sense to talk about the 90-10 rule right now. I was planning on doing it last, but let's touch on it now. The 90-10 rule. Now, this can be used as the 80-20, but I am going to use it as the 90-10 for both weightlifting and endurance training. Endurance training, very simple. The amount of time spent in each zone should be 90-10. We want to spend 90% of our time in zone 1 in a 3-zone model. So a good hotspot for this is around 65% of our max heart rate. We want to spend 90% of our time around 65% of our max heart rate. For fitter individuals, you can push a little bit higher to 70 and maybe fluctuate a bit. For less fit and less experienced individuals, you may even go lower, 60%, and fluctuate from 60 to 65. Then we spend 10% doing really hard stuff. I personally think that long intervals are the most efficient way to train hard. You get a constant rise and a consistent heart rate so that you can tell exactly what's going on. You feel the pace a little bit more and you can really, really push and dig over that 4 to 10 minute time frame, potentially a little bit outside of that. Whereas doing our more traditional HIIT styles, 30-30, 40-20, 15-15-15, these your heart rate can disconnect from the intensity. Your heart rate can skyrocket on the first rep. It can go all over the place and be really hard to track and really hard to implement. Doing a 15-15 on a treadmill is a little bit challenging, whereas doing 3 by 10 minute threshold, 3 by 10 minute at 85% of your heart rate peak is a lot easier. You just do the interval and then you rest for a little bit until you're ready to go again. 90% at 65% is a good sweet spot. You may go up and down over the course of a month just to keep things fresh. And then 10%, around 90% of your heart rate max is another good sweet spot. This is a really good guide, and you can make it however you like. If you're more of a hybrid or a high rocks guy, you could do a day where you're on the rower, a day where you're on the ski, a day where you're on a running day, and then a day where you're on the bike or something. Your cross training can be insane because you do a ton of erg work and then you do a high rocks sim. Your erg work is all zone 1, and then you get to have a ton of fun doing a literal high rock sim once or twice every couple of weeks. It's like there is still so much nuance and individuality you can have while sticking to a good plan. When you have a good coach who understands, or when you understand what your sport really needs, because it may seem like it needs some things and won't always. Okay, so what's the 90-10 rule for strength training? The 90-10 rule for strength training is that 90% of the time you are doing nothing. 10% of the time you are going flat out as hard as you can, maximum effort. Let me give you an example. My current training split is full body twice a week. So 2 out of the 7 days of my week, I lift very hard and I go max effort. I normally only do 1 to 2 sets at a working weight, and these sets are at 0, normally 1 to 2 reps in reserve at the moment. It depends. The whole rest of my week is spent doing sports training or resting. So I don't do any other training at the moment, and I've been progressing consistently over the past few months while playing footy. That's me not worrying about getting extra sessions in, trying to do top up, trying to get an arm pump in here and there, maybe having an arms and legs day where I can. Stick to the 2 a day. If I have a bye, I'll do 2 working sets both times for all of my exercises. Trying to do my best to rest the other days. I don't want to do any more than I need to. So that ties in. It's trying to stick to my 90-10 even while I'm in season for the endurance stuff. That's something that I do a whole nother podcast on, is literally no one needs to be doing hard running or hard training outside of their sports training in the team sports space. So that's your rugby, your basketball, your soccer, your AFL, your NRL. No one out of those groups needs to be doing hard training outside of their team training, because the team training is the 10%. You're constantly sapping in the game and in your team training from your adaptation reserve. You can get so much value and continue to build your aerobic base in season by focusing on your easy work whenever you get the chance. It's going to help with recovery. If you try and do hard stuff outside of your team training, you are tanking your strength gains in season, your skill gains in season, your speed gains in season, and performance. You are taking away so much for so little value because your adaptation reserve is sapped. Really, really good point there. I hope everyone can take that and apply it to their training. Okay, so we're on our last point here. Thanks for sticking with me. Now I wanted to talk about why eccentric strength in the quadriceps and hamstrings is so important. So the main areas where it's so important: jumping, sprinting, athletic pursuits, and endurance running. So I had to read off my screen there. Eccentric strength is independent of concentric strength to a certain degree. It is hard to have bad eccentric strength when you have really good concentric strength. We can actually increase eccentric strength without increasing concentric strength. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound like a good thing. Actually, it's a really good thing, okay? Eccentric strength is super important for our quads and hamstrings during sprinting because they have to absorb force. They're not generating much force, but they're keeping us within our bounds and helping with turnover and leg recovery. While the muscles of the hip are much more force dominant and creating the movement, whereas for our quads and hammies, they're keeping us going. They're keeping us within bounds, technique good, and absorbing the forces. There's a lot of opposing forces during sprinting, and we need something to actually absorb it. Now, how do we build this eccentric strength without actually building concentric strength? Which again, it might sound funny, but we want to do that. We really do. We can have parts of our program which are focused on concentric strength, hypertrophy, motor unit recruitment. Very, very, very important stuff. But a very smart trainer will also think about their eccentric strength. How do we do this? Mainly eccentric overload and plyometrics. And you want to say, plyometrics? What? Plyometrics are, in a way, a form of eccentric overload training. We have huge ground reaction forces, very high eccentric demands to absorb the force so that we can then produce it again. So plyometrics are a great way to develop eccentric strength and improve the muscle's ability to pull on the tendon and use it as an effective spring. I don't want to spend too much time on the plyos. I want to talk about eccentric overload. My, every month this year, I have appreciated eccentric overload training more and more. Eccentric overload training is the best way to develop eccentric strength. Why? Because we can overload it. We can choose loads that our muscle cannot lift concentrically and cause that 50% deficit during traditional training to become less of a deficit. And we're now exposing more of our muscles, more of our muscle fibers to that eccentric strain, that passive tension, which is great for decreasing strain injury risk. It is great. I would say the gold standard. Some people might say different. Now that's our peripheral adaptations, is the reduction in strain. Our muscles grow relatively longer. But what about centrally? Well, it is a skill. Eccentric strength is a skill. You have to be able to access those fibers during overload training so that you can access them otherwise. So, best example is vertical jumping. The better you can be at loading your tendons, pulling on them, and then getting that spring, the better you will be at vertical jumping, especially in athletic moments. So if you're approach jumping, if you're single leg jumping on the run, that eccentric strength and the ability to actually use your tendon as a spring is critical. And we get it most from eccentric overload training. What are the best types? My favorites are 2-to-1s. So this is where you do the concentric portion of an exercise with both limbs, and then you use one to do the eccentric portion. This can be done using a leg press. Please use stoppers, a leg extension, and a seated hamstring curl. And then we have our Nordics. So the typical Nordic and a reverse Nordic. So typical Nordic being for hamstrings and reverse being for quads and hip flexors. So you can see how we're exposing these strained susceptible muscles to eccentric overload in very, very careful amounts of volume so that they're not strained for training, but they're getting exposed and becoming relatively less strained by training and max effort sprinting. One other form of eccentric overload, a bit harder to track, is sprinting. We cannot do all of this and then forget our high intensity sprints, again at a very sensible volume, because they're all parts of the puzzle. But if you can put these all together in a nice, very well crafted training plan, you are going to be bulletproof. This is what real bulletproofing looks like, is having eccentric strength, lots of speed exposure, heavy lifting, and good mobility. That is true bulletproofing. Fluffy exercises are not. Now, one last area where the eccentric strength is very beneficial, and we will likely get most of our gains in this area from traditional, but it's important that endurance runners understand just how important eccentric strength is to them. Now, we have a common outcome known as running economy, which is our energy expenditure or consumption at a submaximal pace. One of the best ways we can improve running economy is through eccentric strength improvement, because we are absorbing our forces much more efficiently and reducing the amount of vertical movement we have up and down, so that our travel path literally becomes a straighter line. So if we look at it from a three-dimensional perspective opposed to a line on a Strava chart, we are doing less up and down, which means over time there's less peak forces, we're doing less overall work, and that can improve performance and reduce injury risk. Now, like I said, most of this is going to come from traditional. I personally haven't seen a ton of evidence on eccentric overload for running economy, but there is a lot for traditional heavy slow resistance training on a running economy. We know that this is beneficial, and understanding why is very helpful to motivate yourself to do it. You can't get this from running because it's different. You don't have the same level of recruitment and strain which drives that coordination, that eccentric strength, as you do running compared to lifting. Thank you so much for watching. Those 4 topics is all I wanted to cover today. I hope I covered them well for you, and I went into an appropriate amount of depth. I try and cater to the individual as much as I can and talk both sides of the story, from an athletic perspective and from a general health, longevity, and fitness perspective. For those people who are getting started on their fitness journey and want to improve fitness. Maybe they've had trouble in the past with trainers or fads, and they just want something that works. That's who I aim to help. So, like I said at the start of this video, please click the link down below in the description to have a look at my website. And if you're interested in coaching, use the booking call link in the description as well, and we can get you started. Also, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and leave a 5-star review if you're on any of the podcast platforms. This helps the algorithm a lot and encourages other people to watch and listen. Thank you.